I'm going to introduce our next moderator and panel. The panel is International Commercialization and Creative Models for Execution. And Ritu Kamal, take it over and tell us how to execute.
No big deal. Thank you, Dan. So welcome to our panel on global commercialization. So our panel earlier this morning.
It's okay. Okay. Let's start over. Thank you, Deb, and welcome to our panel on global commercialization. We have a really exciting panel and a very illustrious set of speakers here, so I'll get to that in just a minute. I think the panel in the morning really set this up very well, talking about designing for the user, designing the right technology for the right setting, which is really very critical. And hopefully with this panel, we can take it to the next step, which is how do you take that new technology to the patient? How do you do that in a sustainable fashion? How do you do that in a financially viable fashion? And how do you do that across companies of different sizes? On this panel today, we have representation from startups, mid-sized companies, big companies across different types of markets, emerging market settings, Western Europe, East Asia, West Asia, etc. So with that, let me start to introduce our panel here. So I'll start with June. June Fujimoto is the head of marketing at Bloom Life, which is a digital health startup focused on prenatal needs. Before this, she has actually also worked in Medtronic, scoping out new markets for new technologies at that big company, as well as working in personalized medicine. So welcome, June. Then let me move to Sandra. Sandra is the VP and GM for Endovenous at Medtronic. And previous to this, she led the same business out of Northern Europe for Medtronic. So she has a lot of experience working in global markets and global commercialization. And previous to that, she worked in renal denervation at Covidien. So welcome, Sandra. Cecile Ferracci, on my right, has almost 20 years of experience in global commercialization across a variety of different products. And she is currently the general manager for Europe for Endologics, which is a company in the aortic aneurysm space. And she's previously also worked at Bard and Johnson & Johnson. And then finally, Ruchika Singhal, who is the Vice President for International at CR Bard. Previously, she has worked at Medtronic, specifically looking at bringing new technologies to market in emerging market settings like India and China. So we're really excited to have you here as well. So thanks to all of you for joining us. So look, with that, let me just dive in. So commercialization in global markets is complex, and we have been discussing in our pre-calls around some of the common pitfalls that companies of different sizes, some of the common mistakes they make, some of the things that they overlook when they're starting to think about a commercial launch plan. So to get us started on this question, maybe Sandra, you can start us off.
Yep. So first of all, good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with you this morning. So you will hear two French accents, which is rare. So I'm not the only one. We had two.
On the same sofa.
Yeah. So yeah, what I heard actually this morning that globalization, it's about execution. So you take this global strategy, and our role, once we are based in a region, it's to execute this global strategy. So we make the assumption that what is true in one geography is also true in other developed geography. We also make the assumption that we could just copy-paste the strategy, the plan, execute on it, and everything is all right. Actually, I strongly believe that this is not right. This is not the right thing to do. Execution is key, of course, but it's critical to ensure that you have the right strategy for your market specificities. So when I led the peripheral vascular business in Europe a few years ago, so at this time in the United States, the team was extremely successful with one innovative and differentiated technology, and all our strategic imperatives were built around this technology. The issue was that in Europe, we were not good at all. So we were failing month after month against our objective, and we were just unsuccessful with this technology. So the question was at this time, why that? I mean, it's the same technology to treat the same kind of indication, to deliver the exact same kind of outcomes. So what's wrong there? And what we overlooked, I think, at that time was the market by itself. So we are talking about developed geographies. Yes, that's true. But Europe, especially Europe and in many other geographies in the world, you have many different countries. And all those countries, they have, first of all, different reimbursement environments. So it's extremely complex. The distribution channel as well was not the same. So the way how the US was structured, the way how Europe was structured, bottom up was very different as well, with different kind of priorities and focus. So you don't have the same level of, let's say, dedication and focus compared to what you would find in the United States. So the third thing is also the fact that the competitive landscape by itself is completely different. So as you all know, it's so much easier to access the European market. So you can find many more competitors compared to the United States. And this is something that you have to take in consideration. But what was the most important, and that's what we missed, is the fact that our call point was different at that time. So, and that was a major difference. So in the United States, the call point was the interventional cardiology specialty, whereas in Europe, it was the interventional radiology specialty. Two different worlds. I mean, when you work with the interventional cardiologists or the interventional radiologists, you quickly understand that the demand, we heard about the demand, the needs are very different. So this is key because if you look at what happened for us, we had completely different needs because the demand was different clearly, and also the barriers to penetrate this market, to get this therapy being adopted, had nothing to do with what the US team faced. So I think that you have two ways. Whether you accept that and you do your best, you execute on the plan and you try to gain 1% market share every year, and if you are happy with that, it's good for you. Whether you decide to take it from a different angle, and you have to be strategic. And I think that's key there. So when you work with the regions, execution is critical, but you have to have also people with this strategic thinking being able to develop the right strategic initiatives to be successful in this specific geography.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, and I think we'll hit on that a little bit further along as we continue to talk about looking at specific markets and developing strategies around that. So if I can turn to you, Ruchika, to kind of carry us on.
Yeah, same thing, what you're talking about there, Sandra. So I'm at CR Bard, been there for about a year, and I was brought on along with some of my counterparts in the different divisions, really to address how do we drive the global business. And so the division I work for, we do hernia treatment, which if you know, it's a weakness in the abdominal wall. It is apparently one of the most commonly done surgeries around the world. And the way we were approaching it was really, oh, there are 1 million procedures in the US and there are 300 million people in the US. Multiply that by the global population, that's what we should be at. I was like, okay, well, let's start. So how do you break that down? I think that understanding how each market is different is so important. And hernia is not one disease. There's incisional hernia, there's umbilical hernia, there's inguinal hernia. There's different levels of procedure complexity. In certain parts of the world, they use sterilized mosquito net to treat hernia. In other parts of the world, they use $30,000 worth biologic grafts made out of human and porcine materials to treat hernias. Which is the right solution for that population? You don't know, and the answers are different. So for us, it was a lot of just time spent on the ground, understanding what the challenges are, and then developing strategies very customized to the opportunity in that market. And there's really no easy way to do this. I think in the past 7 months, I've been on a plane a lot, and literally like every city by city you go, country by country, talk to doctors, understand, and listening. I think that was the theme for the panel before. It's the same thing on the execution side too. You partner with the local countries and addressing all of the systemic barriers around, are there enough surgeons? Do surgeons even know how to treat hernia? Everybody learns how to do hernia, but that doesn't mean they know how to do it. And then working with the reimbursement systems, understanding local competition, and sometimes that competition is a mosquito net, other times it's another MNC. And developing solutions around that, it is very much has to be customized by country and sometimes segments within countries, because I think we heard, Anola, you were talking about like India's 4 or 5 countries in one, and there's no one strategy for India.
Thank you. June?
Yeah, so I think what is often overlooked in my experience is really developing local physician advocates in country before going towards commercialization. I remember when I was at Medtronic, I filled in at the last moment for a product launch in India, and literally I flew out and for 2 weeks went to 6 different cities presenting a dozen times to hundreds of physicians on our new products, on the clinical value, the technical aspects, and I thought, why am I doing this? Like, what value add am I bringing to this? Why don't we have physicians doing this on our behalf? And it really brought to light that lack of forethought in terms of developing physician advocates ahead of time. And just a little background at Bloom Life, we're an early stage startup in digital health, focused on prenatal care, and we're developing wearables and leveraging data analytics to better understand pregnancy and pregnancy complications. And I brought our medical grade sensor that expectant moms can wear to evaluate maternal and fetal health parameters. And our first product to market is focused on more the 3rd trimester in the contraction side. And we have about 12 people in our company. Half are located here, half are located in Belgium. And so what we're doing is ensuring that we're doing clinical studies now in Belgium to provide the claims that are necessary for a European launch, and working with local physicians to be able to get their advocacy, to get an understanding of how we can leverage our technology within that region, and being able to then present out that research at international conferences. And it's not us doing it, but it is the local physicians doing it.
That's great. And Cecilia?
Well, what I would like to highlight is what Sandra said at the beginning. My expertise is mainly in Europe and what we would call EMEA, but Europe is 28 countries, well, kind of 27 since the Brexit, but still 28.
Still.
And it's really 28 different systems. Well, you have kind of a lot of languages. It's not about just the size of the IFU. It's about the culture. It's about the access. It's about the reimbursement system. It's about what are the drivers for adoption of a technology. And even on the most developed countries in Europe, and you were speaking about hernia, and I've been in hernia in the past, and if you look at, for example, I still remember in Belgium, that is kind of one of the countries that is developed, you would say, when you have hernia, you can have on one side, but you can have on 2 sides, which is bilateral. Well, in Belgium, they would not take a graft that can treat both sides because there is no reimbursement for that. So it's more interesting for the physician to do one side, to send back the patient home, and to do the other side another time. So to have the patient to have 2 anesthesia and things like that. They know that it's not the best for the patient, but it's where they get more money and it's where they get reimbursed. So when you launch a product, you have always to think about, I would say, 2 times. The first thing is that where I want to get access fast and within the frame that exists, and how I change the frame after that. Because you can work with reimbursement authority, you can try to change the path, but it takes time. So the first thing is say, how can I get my product with the existing frame, what are the unmet needs it will fit, and then let's go to the next step, that is if I can develop this product. And I think it's key, and it's the same for stent. Or for example, drug-eluting balloon, if you look in some countries, it's not reimbursed. Even if people know that it's probably better than to have 5 stents, they will continue to do what is reimbursed, because it's, at the end, I think it's one of the key things is that, and it's not only in Europe, but in many countries, what is driving practice, it's first the reimbursement system and not the opposite. So it's a lot of work for the company to make sure to work with the political, with the healthcare systems to ensure the reimbursement fit what is best for the patient. But the first step is the practice is going to be driven by the reimbursement system.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, especially in markets that are reimbursed. And some markets, I think, hopefully we'll discuss, are also self-pay. But to stay on that thread, so these are some of the challenges that we talked about, right? Some of the things that companies overlook. But because of these unique complexities in these markets, there are also interesting things that the companies going into that market can leverage. So perhaps you can speak a little bit to some unique examples of leveraging strengths inside markets that you have had an experience with.
Well, I would say it is back to really look by each country where we can have access easily or not. So if you go to Europe, and if most of the people here are working globally, you know that in Europe you have countries where with just CMOC you can get market access. And basically these three countries would be Germany first, then you have UK and Italy, which are kind of easily. And then you have the next step is that, yes, I can get access to the market, but do I need to go through a tender process that is quite cumbersome, like in Italy, or can I get access directly? So you would probably choose as a company, if you start a business, to go first to Germany, because it's the easy way to do, and you can work directly with physicians. Physicians still have kind of power of choice of the device they want, and they can influence, and it's how you make it. So you really, first, you have to target which country I go, and even within Germany, first you're going to say, well, some hospitals are within GPOs. It's not easy to get access. Some hospitals are the one where you can get access easily. So you need to sub-segment even within the country to get access to it. And you do that for each level and each country. So when we're speaking about global strategy and just legal execution, I think it's important that when we develop the global strategy, this is already understood, because you can't really develop a global strategy if you don't know what is required for the local execution after.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, Sandra, you have a very interesting story about exactly that, localization and local needs. So
yeah, back to my story. So, and I agree with you. I think that when you have challenges, you have opportunities. And it's really a matter of understanding what are those opportunities. So what we did actually, so I told you two options, whether you accept that and you accept to grow by 1% market share per year, which for me was not an option. So I decided to go for the second one, which was to take it from a different angle. So we really started to think about what was truly different between the two markets, the US and Europe. Two major differences. One, reimbursement. So reimbursement drives behavior, drives also a therapy to a standard of care. And we didn't that in any countries excepted one where we got something, but it was not good enough, let's say. Then the second one, as I said, was the call point by itself. So interventional radiology versus interventional cardiology, two different worlds. So pretty big barriers for us. So what we did actually, instead of focusing on the product, we focus on our customers. So we have an interventional radiology specialty, and they have needs. So we listen to them. We ask questions. And they told us. I mean, if you listen to them, they will tell you what to do, what's going on. It's just a matter of asking also the right questions. That's very important, because many times they don't even know what they need. So it's very important to ask the right question there. And then very, very quickly, we understood that actually the major focus for them at this time and the major interest was the emerging kind of therapies, which was the vascular embolization type of therapies at that time. So, and very quickly, because we had a neurovascular franchise within our, let's say, company at that time, so we very rapidly understood that we could leverage some of the neurovascular platforms to develop peripheral vascular devices for peripheral vascular indications. And we started working on this. So it was super exciting, because suddenly you see the light. So you run, you develop the strategy, the plan. We built a roadmap with all the product specifications. So really, we really went beyond what we were supposed to do, let's say. And we had so much passion for that. So we did our best. For 2 years, I had to pitch the same story again and again and again to some of our leadership, let's say senior leaders at that time, and I was going nowhere. I was always back to square one and always back to square one, and I can't tell you how many times I have been close just to give up, because it's hard. 2 years, it was very hard. Even my boss at that time told me, you are alone now. You are alone because no one wants to follow you, wants to do that. So you are alone. And at the end, we were 3 persons in Europe with great support from some people in the United States. And we made the decision, the 3 of us, to keep pursuing this path because it's not about what you believe. I knew it. We knew it, no doubt. We had all the data. We put the right strategy in place, the right go-to-market strategy. We were addressing all the needs. It was patient-focused. We knew that we would save lives by providing those kind of devices to those patients. We know that we could treat many more patients in many more ways and many more places. So it's not only about what you believe. When you are convinced about something, don't give up. Keep doing what you think is the right thing to do, not only for yourself, but for your market, for your customers, for your team, and ultimately for the patients. That's what is key. And after 2 years, I got the unique opportunity to be invited to present to the vascular therapy leadership team, and that was my chance. 2 options again, whether it's dead, whether you keep going. So I went there, and I can tell you that I spent a lot of time to take this strategy from all the different angles. So to have a strong financial business model in place, I try to focus as much as I can on the patients and why this was important. It was based on our mission as well. And after an hour, where I got so much pushback and questions, which is good actually, because I can tell you that after 2 years, I could address any pushback and questions. I had an answer for almost everything. And at the very end, after 1 hour, I would never forget our president, she said, "This is a no-brainer." And that was like, just to think about that, it's still big for me. That was huge. I mean, this is a no-brainer. And I understood that now we have the green light, we can make that. I call my 2 friends in Europe, they were crying, I tell you, crying on the phone because they worked so hard to make that happen. And some people would even say, you can put your career at risk. But that was not the case. I think that we all grew from this experience, we developed ourselves, and that was, I must say, the most important experience in my career. I learned so much. But I want to thank, at this time, my president of vascular therapy, because these few words, "This is a no-brainer," changed everything in Europe. So then we started to be able to commercialize those devices, and we not only over-delivered on the objectives, but what was important, that finally we had unique technologies, a door opener, so we could just open new doors, access new accounts, and accelerate the growth with our core business. So within less than 2 years, actually, we doubled our market share with our stents and balloons because of that. And I told the team at that time, from an execution standpoint, by the way, I won't measure your performance on vascular embolization because it's just too easy. So you will be measured on the core business. And that was key, and this is what we made. So the message here is that if you get some regions coming to you and sharing some strategies or needs, and be open to that. I mean, and if they don't give up after 2 years, tell to yourself that might be something important there.
What a great story. And doubling market share, that's always a great story.
Yes, it was great.
So let me just turn to this side. I think we had some other interesting thoughts here around leveraging strengths in specific markets that you target. So could you get us started?
Sure. So when I think about leveraging strengths in other markets, I think first I look at who are our investors and why did they invest in us. We just closed a $4 million seed stage round of funding so we can focus more on commercialization. We have the most random investors, though, I will have to say. We've got but I think it speaks to the universality of pregnancy and ensuring the health of moms and babies. So we have Mark Benioff, and at the same time, we've got CAA Ventures, which is the huge talent agency in LA, and we've got Joe Montana's new venture fund. But we also have a couple of international investors, one out of Belgium as well as one out of Korea. And the Koreans are particularly interested in us on the consumer tech side, because Korea has a very well-educated population and are very tech savvy, and looking at how can we leverage those strengths as we evaluate our overall global strategy. At the same time, because we're half based in Belgium, when I'm working out and developing out our commercialization strategy and thinking about how we leverage vendors, I'm not limiting myself to just thinking US because I'm based in the US. So when looking at our website redesign, I interviewed a ton of US-based web developers, but then I also ended up reaching out to Belgian web developers, and I found that there was just a lot more creativity out there, and we went with one from Belgium and are working actively on launching a new website now, which has been great. And there's also opportunities to leverage strengths in other countries because we're a 12-person seed stage company. We don't have a lot of resources and we don't have a lot of money, despite the close we just had. And so thinking creatively of how can we use global resources effectively. So we actually have a virtual assistant out of the Philippines who helps us with some tasks that I just don't have bandwidth to do. For example, I don't have a PR agency right now, and in order to work on our seed stage announcement, I had this virtual assistant help source all the different reporters who've ever written about us, get their contact information, their Twitter following, and that allowed me to really initiate my outreach to the press and moving forward. So giving that person different tasks. At the same time, we also have an AI, an artificial intelligence admin named Alex. He, she, or it ends up scheduling our meetings, and it's always funny how outsiders will engage in conversations with our AI and think it's a real person. And Alex will just respond back. We also are leveraging the incredible global talent out there. Because we're based in the Bay Area, a lot of people want to come out here and work, and there's just incredible talent that we have with J1 visas, and so we have one from Portugal and one from Italy that are working with us now to help us, better understand the European market, but also work on some of the technical development of our product. But to caveat all that, I will say our product is proudly made in the USA, so we are leveraging the strength of the US market as well.
Thank you. So similar, I think maybe talking a little bit more on the operation execution side, it's so coming into a company, BARD has traditionally been very conservative and has been embracing globalization, and it's been an interesting transition for me where just with international, I think I was the second non-white face in the office, really. And as a woman on the leadership team, that was an interesting experience where they're like, oh, you're going to be our international leader. I'm like, great. And when I get out in the countries and meet with my counterparts there, they're like, you're the only international VP of international at BARD. I'm like, I'm not sure what that means. But we started putting a team together, and it was a real challenge to find talent that was willing to move to Rhode Island for one. I don't know how they got me to move. I'm starting to like it now. But finding, how do you find talent, and how do you support international geographies? I actually ended up hiring a person based in China, an American living in China. He's dating a Chinese girl, so he's learning Mandarin, which is awesome. But leveraging technology for day-to-day business management, you have to be really creative. Whether you're in a small person company, in a small startup, or in a large multinational, I think resources are always constrained. And how do you work with all of your different stakeholders to solve those problems creatively? I think one of the things we were doing as a company was sending US sales reps to all these geographies to train our teams there. And I think there was a lot of, we know how to do it best in the US, we're going to come to your market and tell you how to do it. And whether you have whatever challenges you have around reimbursement, or the product is not right, or you don't have the shelf life for 2 years or 3 years, that's a minimum sometimes to get through customs. Those kind of requirements nobody cared about. Cost is not right. Oh, no, this product has been very successful in the US. You just need to learn how to sell that. how do we address all of those challenges? So with the US sales team, when I first heard about this, like, you're sending sales reps and paying business class travel all the way and people are still not trained. I'm like, guys ever heard of GoToMeeting, like Citrix? We could try that. And they're like, oh, well, our internet doesn't support it. And I was like, well, we're going to fix that because my phone can do it off of regular LTE. So we're not going to use our internet. And it's like simple things like that, whether it's AI tools or just technology that's available. And now the entire company is transitioning to that platform because it's like been the revolution. And one of my counterparts, he actually said this to me. He's like, it's so great to have you here because you can get us old white men to, adopt technology. And I was like, looking at his face, and like, as long as you're the one saying that, and not me. But you can change mindsets, and execution at the end of the day, it's those little things, driving cultural change, working one problem at a time. It's not anything super insightful. But it's the slog almost in some ways, but yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and so related to the technology side, I would say that, and this is true a lot of startups, is we do not use email. We use Slack, instant messaging, and that is our only form of communication. The only time we ever use email is for external partners, and we just find it just slows everything down, and particularly since we're working with different geographies.
So that's really interesting, just the kind of the challenges of global commercialization, of actually going across countries, and how do you source teams, how do you staff teams, and how do you keep the ball rolling. So in our earlier conversations, a few key sort of critical points of interest had come up, and I just want to touch on some of them. Ruchika, you had mentioned around pricing specifically, especially if you're looking at a very global strategy. That is to say, you want to launch that same product across different geographies. How do you start to think about, maintaining your margins, but also being able to price competitively in different geographies?
Yeah, so I think, Anola, again, I loved some of the comments that you made, but you have to understand, I think we tend to do a lot of cost plus pricing. Transitioning from that to value-based pricing is a concept that I think across the world and even sophisticated corporations we're still struggling with. China and India in particular, and I think some of the other developing countries, there are a lot of local competitors. So you can get a hernia mesh for $5. You can get a hernia mesh for $500. Take your pick. So when we look at markets, what we've been doing is sub-segmenting within that. If you go to a top-tier hospital in China, level 3 hospital, they've got the reimbursement, they've got the right products. So we look at our portfolio and say, which are the right products for that segment? And how can we offer the best solution for that segment? And then you look at maybe the level 2 hospitals where, and it's not just about product. I think pricing comes into play with your distribution channel, with the value proposition that you're offering those surgeons, the education programs that you're investing in, and how you're delivering those education programs. But then you look at your entire sort of value to that surgeon in the second-tier hospital and say, we'll still do it better. The value that they get is still better than what they have today, but it's a different price point. So I think of that leadership sort of, you provide the best value that you can for every sub-segment that you have there. Now the challenge with that is working with a US-based corporation is how do you create a portfolio of products in those different price points? Because we tend to equate product leadership or innovation with the best and the most expensive and 15,000 features that have to exist in a product. It's just not the case. So I think all the conversation around product innovation that we were having earlier, understanding the needs for that segment is so critical because that second-tier segment may not care about certain other features and they may care about different ones, and they're not always sort of the big, the things that you think about. Like, I don't like to call it like a cheaper product or a less de-featured product. but it's the right product for that segment. So that's really been what we've been trying to get at, is what are those needs? And at least for hernia, we've got a very broad portfolio that we can, again, sub-segmentation is what it comes down to. Yeah, and obviously doing some local design and working with local partners, R&D partners in country to develop the right solutions.
Do you guys have something to add?
Well, what I would say about pricing, it's if you look at just pricing, first of all, you probably as a company have to make some decision time to time. If I look in Europe, some products you prefer not to market them in some countries because if you know if your price is going to be low and it can have an influence in other country and you may don't want to do it. And I think it's an important one. And the other thing, it's when you speak about innovation, at least in Europe, if you look, it's all kind of governmental healthcare. Even if look at us, we are still in good shape, and it's fine. But it's really, I think, innovation for innovation has no really meaning. It's about health economics and what is the benefit for the patient. I think in Europe you will see that more and more, and even Eucomed, that is kind of the equivalent of AdvaMed in Europe, is really advocating for that. Is that if companies want to introduce an innovation in Europe, they better work on data to show the value for the patient and the health economics around it, because the innovation for innovation has no more meaning.
Yeah, I can't agree more with you. I think that this is critical. I think that many years ago, providing clinical outcomes was enough to come with a new disruptive technology. Nowadays, you have to demonstrate clinical and economic outcome across all the stakeholders. So it's not only the hospitals, the payers, could be the patients, for the company as well. What does it mean? And things are moving very rapidly. I strongly believe that pricing is something which is completely artificial, actually. You can play with that. So depending on what you want to achieve, depending on the strategy and the value proposition that you are offering, so pricing will be different. So if you just focus on a product, the price will go down. If you focus on the value proposition, and if you focus on addressing the needs, and if you focus on addressing some unmet needs just beyond doing the intervention with one specific device, this is how you will maintain the price and you will create value. And I think and we see that just in the United States with the macro now, where everything is moving from volume to quality, so performance. And so this is something which is going to come no matter what. So what's going to be key at the very end is going to be the outcome for the patient. And this will go well beyond just the traditional pricing models that we are currently seeing. I think this will change.
Yeah. So I want to pick up on something that both of you sort of brought up, which was around selecting markets. And as you said, there are some markets that are just not worth it, and you're going to dilute your value and your value proposition for that product because of the pricing war that will ensue. And that reminded me, June, of something that you were mentioning around selecting markets for your current product, and sort of like thinking about Korea versus Europe versus the US. So maybe you could speak to a little bit about how do you think about selecting markets, especially as a young company when there's 200 countries, but you can't go to all of them.
Yeah, so we are going, so I guess I should caveat, our company is at the intersection of consumer tech and med tech in the end. And we've done the due diligence for the US and decided we're going to go consumer first. We're going to go direct to consumer with our sensor. And the rationale is we want to validate the need, the demand, the support, and that the med tech side just takes much longer to get the FDA clearance to integrate into the healthcare system. And given the stage we're at, we want to ensure success and revenue moving forward. And so to that extent, the consumer mindset of wanting more control over your pregnancy, that is just a universal need in wanting a healthy pregnancy. I think where the differences come in is what role does the doctor play in a woman's pregnancy. And in the US, there is much more of the patient advocacy, patient proactive care, because you're paying out of pocket a lot of times for your health care. So you're more likely to go and do the due diligence and do the research and be willing to pay for the best care possible. And so it's just a lot easier for us to launch US first because of the consumer mindset. And as we're looking towards other countries, when you get to Europe, when you get to Korea, there's a lot more doctor involvement. There's a lot more deference, I would say, to how the doctor treats and prescribes and relying on their opinion. And so it is more critical for us to ensure that we work towards getting into the healthcare system a lot earlier to be able to provide that support and from the medical community at large as we go to market, where it's not as necessary in the US to start in that manner.
And that's a really interesting point. I think especially in emerging market settings, physicians have a lot of power, but perhaps but patients have all the purchasing power because a lot of these markets are actually self-pay. So Ruchika, could you comment on that a little bit from your experience?
Sure. So maybe I'll talk a little bit about some of the work I was doing before BARD at Medtronic. I was doing a lot of work in India, really trying to address some of the underserved patient populations. And it's really all about the patient at the end of the day, where they are paying out of pocket. And what we were doing then was addressing chronic ear infections in children and in adults because it never got treated as kids. And the incidence of that across India was between 6 to 10%. And a lot of people had hearing loss resulting from that. So how do you empower that patient to even come in? I think initially a lot of our hypothesis was that, we'll just diagnose these patients and we'll tell them to come in and then they'll get treated and they'll buy hearing aids and it's all going to be good. Turns out that the psychological part of driving consumer behavior was such a huge barrier driving that conversion, because for a lot of these families, they may have the money, but there are all sorts of cultural things you have to address, where the women may say that, I don't feel good about spending money on myself, because culturally, most Indian women, it's all about sort of giving up everything for the family. So it's just not right. Or the child may want to do it for their parents, but the parents feel that they're getting older. What difference does it really make? Like, why would I be an additional burden to my child? So you think about bringing healthcare, unless you address all of those stakeholders in that big medical decision, the doctor is great, which as medical device companies, we tend to sell to doctors, but really how do we engage with the patient, and how do we engage with sort of changing that society dynamic around driving behavioral change? I think as medtech companies, this is an area we haven't really touched on very much. It's like building, addressing that behavioral part around patient empowerment, which it's not the same as it is in an insurance reimbursed market where you don't feel that pain on a daily basis. I think India was definitely the place where it's just like, I can put together all sorts of processes and cool technology to diagnose ear infections and hearing loss and build an army of community health workers, but I have no idea how to sit down and talk with a mother and convince her that she should get this treated.
Thank you. So I also do want to leave some time for questions, and I'm not sure if there are any questions coming into the app yet, but thank you.
We have two.
Yes.
Okay, great. So we have two coming through the app. One is, given the complexity even within geographies, how do we address global markets most efficiently? Broad question.
How do you address it most efficiently? So when I started at BARD, I think we have an existing business in international already, and there are teams of people everywhere around the world. And I was a team of one with 2 people on my team, and I was supposed to hire a whole team of people. I was like, great, well, you're going to triple the international business in the next 5 years. And I'm like, okay, where do I start? So what, numbers really is what it comes down to. Break it down by country. We looked at what is the biggest market size today and where's the biggest market potential in the future. And market potential to me is the most exciting part, because as medical device leaders in the industry, you want to, our mission is not just to help the top 1 billion people in the world. There's an additional at least 2 to 3 billion we can get to today, and hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years get to the rest. So market potential is a big piece. And then you sort of go from there. So typically for me, what that ends up being is Europe, because it's a big market and you can't really ignore that, and then sort of the Eastern European emerging markets, and then Japan, China, India, and Brazil, Mexico. So, and it's different for different technologies, I think, but at least for me, and while there isn't data good enough anywhere in medical devices, market size today and market potential for tomorrow is at least how I look at it.
Well, I would agree with you. I think the market opportunity at the end is what you look at. You look after at the market barriers and what are the costs for entering a product in a market, or a full portfolio in a market. That could be what I mentioned before, is going to be about regulatory, about reimbursement, but it can be also about access to customers. So what is the network, what kind of sales network you need to have in the country, and what is kind of sales coverage you need to be able to access this market. Then you have payment. That kind of company can be sensitive to that. How long does it take to be paid? And in some country, you have to be ready that it's more than 1 year of DSO. So that's, are you ready for that or not? What is more important? But then you add other things. It's that if you look today, for example, and if I look at in endologics today, we are facing that. So you look at the growth opportunities, certainly not Europe currently, and probably India and Asia is kind of the biggest growing opportunity for the future. But if you look at what do you want today with new products, you probably want to have clinical outcomes, and you want to have clinical data, and you want to have health economics. So you're going to go for Europe first to get that. So that's what is important. But then you think, my next step is going to be Asia Pacific, because that's probably the future opportunity. So it really depends on what is important for you at one stage for the product or the therapy that you're going to launch.
Yeah, my point of view is, if you want to be effective from a global market standpoint, I think that the first thing is to have a true global organization, so with a true global understanding. So too many times we are very much US-centric in many companies, because US is the biggest opportunity by far from a revenue standpoint. So this is always the primary focus. So I think this is critical, and you mentioned that to bring those people actually to have and bring this diversity of thought, of experience, people coming from different or other kind of horizon, to help actually building this global team and get this understanding on the fact that what I think I knew is actually not right. So you need to be humble, and before you do anything, to your point, it's to have some basic understanding on all those market specificities, and primary also beyond the market analysis, all the barriers. So you mentioned the market by itself. You will measure your market share, what's the potential, and what's next here for us is what are the barriers? How do we address those barriers? And you need to do that even before launching any new technology and for your primary geographies. So it's important to have, like, you are VP of International. I think that you should be VP of Global, because global is the world. And that's what should change if we really want to be effective there.
Yeah, and I would say, I agree with all that was said. I think one of the other things to evaluate is strategic fit. And although, we're a startup, we're very much interested in how can we look at different markets to support our global mission. We're very much a mission-based company, improving the health of moms and babies, and not really just focused on those consumers who can afford our product, but looking at where else can our technology be leveraged. We're in some discussions with the UN and with organizations in Africa looking at remote monitoring. Can our technology be used to improve prenatal care in those areas as well.
All right, we've
So-
got questions piling up. We have maybe 4 more. So I think this was inspired by Sandra's story earlier, but what are the right questions to ask customers to surface those valuable needs so that you're driving strategy and separating from less important focuses?
So from a question standpoint, it's, first of all, I think that you need to listen a lot, and you need to understand what are the primary or key unmet needs. That's something which was critical. So they were, at this time, trying to do their best with some devices, but this was not appropriate for the indications that they were treated. So we actually, we asked some questions to design and feature some new devices to address those specific needs. And we, at the end, we truly partnered together. I have never seen, honestly, I have never seen so much support from a customer standpoint. They were as engaged as we were. And when we built this strategy together, we would have never been as, let's say, successful, and we would have never been able to develop such a solid strategy without the support. So you need to ask the questions, you need to identify the needs, but once you have this common interest, this common focus, there is a time where you partner together and you make that happen together, because alone we would have certainly not have been successful.
Can I just add something like that? I think to the point of the previous panel on that, it's kind of, there is a right balance, because if you really expect a physician, when you ask him what he needs, he probably doesn't know, or he thinks that he knows, but reality is that there is very limited number of really visionary people that are able to understand what they need and what could be the help for them. And I like the previous panelists who say, well, the first thing I ask them is why do they use what they use today, and what are the drivers for it? Because that's, I think this one, they can probably tell you more or less why they do that. Now they can understand what are the gaps in their practice and what they would like to do, but to expect them to have the design of what really they need, I think this is illusion in an illusion, and most of the kind, most of the really new product or true innovation are not really coming from physicians, and we have to be aware of that.
I think we have time for a couple more questions.
Yes. We haven't heard anyone mention Russia as a key market, so would love to have perspectives from the panel on that geography and the driving market factors there.
Well, I'm going to Moscow on Sunday.
I was there 3 weeks ago.
Wow.
So for me, it hasn't been a focus at the moment, just because with a lot of the political instability, and for the segment of devices that we are in, there isn't any reimbursement there for that right now. So we're not focused on it for my division. In my previous life at Medtronic, I was there a couple of times, and I struggled with that market personally, just because a lot of the purchases at the time were made through these like state-sponsored funding that appeared. So for a few years, we were getting a lot of growth from that. And once those programs went away, it's just been really cyclical. So that's, from a business standpoint, maintaining sort of continuity there has been a bit of a challenge. That being said, I think the need there is huge. I think the incidence of cardiac disease and obesity and diabetes is one of the highest in the world. I think in the developed world, it probably has the least, the shortest life expectancy for men especially. I think it's the vodka, personally, but yeah, so, and the government recognizes that, and they're trying to do things, but I think I actually met an ex-KGB person. That kind of scared me. Yeah, I'm not sure I can offer a whole lot. It's when you've got the whole world trying to prioritize that, right now, even though Russia was part of the BRIC, it's kind of been a little bit lower on the horizon. And even Brazil, I would say, despite all of the challenges right now, at least for me, Brazil is much higher up on the list in terms of a focus country.
Yeah, I think that in Russia, the challenge is that even if you get the reimbursement, they have quotas in place. And if I take like your type of therapy, for example, they have very few quotas per year. So even if they will make the diagnostic and they will clearly identify that this patient needs this type of procedure, if they make it at the end of the year, too bad for the patient. And that's a major issue. And the physicians there, I met with many young physicians, and they are fighting against the system by itself. So the government is trying to protect somehow the healthcare expenses, because they are supposed to provide care to any Russian people there. And they try to keep everything under control with all those quotas. And for those kind of therapies where you could save life, it's a big, let's say, limitation and a big frustration for those physicians. But I have rarely seen so many young physicians with this willingness to make things happen and to move the needle. So I think that at one point, it's going to change. I don't know how long it's going to take, but from my observation, it will change.
Well, if we look at Russia, for example, we have also to remember that most of us are working for a public company or a company that want to be clean. And up to recently, I think compliance is one of the big things. So that's also one of the reasons why I think it's kind of the elephant in the room, but that's the reason why most of the company are kind of not going really fast speed in Russia, is that you have a lot of young physicians that, yes, want to work, but they have to work against a system that is not very compliant. So it's one of the things, and yes, it will happen because most of the countries that were not really good in terms of compliance recently now move to, because they see that there is no way to stay in the bad old practice, but it takes time in some places.
And I think that's a really critical point about different countries have different practices, and as a global company, you have to comply. So I think that's all the questions that we have time for. So I want to thank the panel for taking the time to speak with us and sharing your insights.
Can we get one more question? Just one more?
Oh, sure.
Okay, it's for Cecile. Cecile, my name is Maria Shepard. My company is MedtechVision. And you said, the question the audience member asked was, how does product design drive strategy? How do you design design your products to be strategic? And I think you said, and I just wanted to confirm, that you talked to the people who are providing the healthcare, and you ask them, why do you do what you do? And then how can that be improved? Is there anything that you can add to that? Because I agree with you completely. I think that's what you said. I'm just clarifying.
I'm not sure. So,
it was brilliant, by the way.
I don't. No, I'm not sure that I get your question on this one, but I think my point about product design was more about that you should not expect a physician to come with an idea of a design systematically. That most of the breakthrough, it's as company came or R&D people came with an idea, and then people adopt it and embrace it. And I think we should more rely on that and really looking. And I think in the previous panel you mentioned that you have been using a company to help to create design, to really look at unmet needs and how this could be transformed in a design. And I think I personally strongly believe in that much more than just expecting physicians to come with their own design that would be the best for everyone. Then I think more on the global side, that to say, and it was more Sandra that say, as a global company, don't expect to have a US design that fit for everyone, because it will probably not work, and that's true. Or if it's one design, then it will be for different targeted customers in the different region. It's probably not something you can say, this is the product and you have to sell it the same way than we do in the US, then it will not work. You need to say, well, maybe this is the product, but then let the different geographies see how it fits in their market and how they can introduce it.
So on that note, I think that is exactly the note to end on. So thank you very much to the panelists, and thank you for your insights today. And next to you.
Thanks to you.
So what I'll reiterate is something Sandra said, which is about your career limiting move, risking your career. Who among us has not risked our career for the sake of something 5 years down the road? And I like to say that every time I get a no from an investor, that's one less no. Right? I don't care about 100 no's, I just need one yes. And so I applaud your persistence, because clearly it was the right thing to do by virtue of the fact that it worked. and you got market share, and the outcomes are great. So we should all be doing that. I mean, we all risk our careers.